I'm pretty certain this video is going to upset many Sony alpha photographers, because we might finally have learned the totally absurd reason why Sony is not updating the high-end camera with new firmware updates and new features, like for example the Sony A1, the Sony A7sIII, but is instead pushing hard on lower-end cameras like the FX30, the FX3, the ZV-E1, and there is really an unexpected, absurd reason that I just learned today. And before I dig into this, please take 2 seconds time to subscribe this channel and hit the notification button to not miss any of my upcoming very exciting new videos and rumors. For more than a year now, I was wondering why Sony has that very strange strategy to add new features through firmware update on affordable FX and ZV cameras, but doesn't add those same features on cameras like the A1 and the A7sIII, cameras that are much more expensive and actually also in very need of some of those features, like for example lens breathing compensation, anamorphic squeeze. Those are features that, for example, are mandatory to be implemented on the A7sIII. And there were many rants on YouTube from Philip Bloom, Gerald Andon, Cinedi, and many others. And some of them even said, like, why are we going to buy in future high-end expensive cameras if we know they don't get updated properly, and that lower-end cameras will have the same, if not better, features 6 months after the release of those high-end cameras. And we were all left wondering. We had many discussions about that, but today we finally have probably learned the reason why this is happening. And this is thanks to a Reddit post made by a member named Gold Cakes. Just to be clear, I don't have full confirmation this information is true, but my sixth sense definitely tells me this is true. I will explain you by the end of this why I think this is true. But let's read the message he posted. The member named Gold Cakes actually owns the A7sIII, and he was also wondering why he doesn't get any firmware update with new features. The title of the post is, I got the unofficial reason why the Sony A7sIII is not getting firmware updates. Let's read the article. So we all know by now that the FX3, FX30 and the ZV-E1 have firmware updates like lens breathing compensation, the CI 4K, anamorphic squeeze, etc. But the more expensive cameras like the A7sIII don't get those updates. I was at a Sony event a little while ago, not going to give the specifics, and ended up having drinks with a Sony rep after it finished. I was able to get an unofficial answer as to why these updates are not making its way into the A7sIII. Internally within Sony, they have different divisions for their cinema line, their creators line and the photography focused alpha line. These 3 lines report up to the same person, who then report to imaging solution. Just a bit of explanation here. The cinema line is the FX E-mount lineup, the creators line is the ZV vlogger lineup, and the photography focused alpha line, including the A7sIII and the A1. You would think the A7sIII is part of the cinema lineup. It's not. It's part of the so-called photography focused alpha lineup, even if the A7sIII could perfectly well feature in the cinema lineup. And this is the key to understanding why the Alpha series is not getting those amazing firmware updates. Let's keep reading the post. The executive responsible for all 3 lines has been giving targets to hit around the FX and ZV lines by imaging solution. The lead responsible for the ICLE, those are the interchangeable E-mount alpha cameras. He absolutely wants to ship lens breathing compensation and other features, and apparently there's even a prototype firmware for the A7sIII that fully supports this functionality. However, it is being blocked by this person, by the executive responsible of all 3 lineups, because they're worried about cannibalizing sales for the ones he has harder to hit targets for. This is all information I was able to get. I'm not going to extrapolate any further, and for obvious reasons I don't have any evidence, as this is just a casual conversation and I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But from this conversation it's even more clear to me there are no hardware or functionality limitations, but it's a business decision by Sony. As the owner of an A7sIII, I'm pretty upset. So I'm going to explain now what exactly is happening. We have those 3 lineups. Imaging solution, the big division within Sony, has high targets for the cinema lineup, for the FX series, for the vloggers lineup, for the ZV series. And I know by fact that the markets that are still growing in the camera business are the cinema and the vlogger market. So Sony wants to get as much share as possible in those two segments. That's why they are pushing hard on the FX series, on the ZV series. We just got a new ZV-1 the past month, and this month in May, by end of May, we'll get a new ZV-1, the compact camera, fixed lens, 1-inch camera. We will get a new successor of the ZV-1. So you see they're really pushing into this. This is a target set by the imaging division that knows where the market is trending. And the executive manager of those three lineups, the FX series, the ZV series and the Alpha series, is clearly trying to hit those high targets. And in the fear that Alpha sales would eat up some of those FX and ZV sales, he's not releasing the firmware updates for cameras like the A1 and the A7S3. And I have no evidence as of yet that this is really indeed the case, but I have 14 years of history, and I heard so many stories about companies like Sony and others. I can perfectly guess that this is the real reason. You have to understand, those companies are giant companies. There are many managers. They all care about their own segment, and they have their own single targets within the segment. For them, it doesn't matter if they're hitting their own targets hurts another segment. They have to hit it. And so here I think that with 99% this is the reason why Alpha is left a tiny bit behind. Let's say, let's not be too harsh, but if you're an A1 owner and the A7S3 owner, you are probably pretty upset that you don't get features like lens breathing compensation and anamorphic squeeze that are pretty much only software stuff, and I'm sure there's no hardware limitations on the A1 to implement those features. And I bet by now you're very upset if you are still watching this video, if you haven't left by now because you're very upset and throw away your Sony Alpha camera. But here is my hope. I think we have the power to change the path within Sony. We have to get the message out and let the imaging division know that in the long term this way of thinking about the camera business is hurting them. Who is going to buy a new 7000 A1 II if you know that 6 months after you will get a similar camera that has the same, if not better, features for half the price? They're going to have less sales on the A1 II if people realizes that the A1 and the A7S3 didn't get any update in the past couple of years, any decent real update. They got some minor updates, but not big new feature. I would think twice to buy the A1 II. And I'm a Sony shooter, so I'm not against Sony. But I would think twice. Even if the A1 II has an amazing new sensor, I will wait out the hype and see what's coming after that. And this will hurt Sony in the long term. In the short term, the strategy that Sony is using now might be fruitful for their segment in the cinema lineup and the vlogger lineup. In the long term, it will hurt all sales of all lineups because competition isn't sleeping. Nikon is releasing nice cameras, Canon is releasing nice cameras, Fuji and Panasonic, and they have real solid firmware updates. And over the years, this will make some difference. I think Sony has to completely change the way they're thinking now. They don't have to set targets that hurt the sales of other lineups. They have to see the EMON system as a whole, and they have to push all three lineups as much as they can, because by doing so they will sell more cameras in the long term. I'm convinced about that. And now I will not rest until the day that Sony releases that famous prototype firmware update they already have in their house, that A7S3 firmware update and probably also the A1 firmware update. I really want them to release this. It's just a matter of convincing that one person, that one executive manager to do this, and he has to talk to the imaging division that this in the long term will be best for all three lineups. My feeling is that if we are all working together, you like this video, you make your own video, and we share the videos of all others, we push it in a very constructive way, without hate, without too much frustration, but with hope that Sony is willing to listen to us, then we will get those firmware updates for our alpha cameras. And I think we will solve the last remaining issue with Sony, which is that lack of firmware support on some of their cameras, because other cameras are really getting cool updates like the ZV and the Fix series, but the A1 and A7S3 are not getting those. Fingers crossed, by end of this year, the A1 and the A7S3 will have all those nice features we saw on the ZV-1, on the FX3, on the FX30. I'm sure of that we can achieve it. Like this video, subscribe this channel, hit the notification button, and see you soon.